There is one number in your yacht's brochure that can leave you dead in the water in the middle of the sea: the range. The brochure promises 1,000 nautical miles. Physics says otherwise. Realistically, 480 to 600. The rest is just marketing. I've been selling motor yachts for 20 years, and I love these boats. And that's exactly why I'll show you the numbers you won't find in any brochure. Every year, crews call out the rescue services because of empty tanks. Not because of a storm, but because they trusted a table in a brochure. Today, I'll break down the 5 tricks yards use to flatter the refuel figures. And at the end, I'll give you a simple formula that turns any brochure into the truth in 30 seconds. The first trick starts before the yacht even leaves the dock. Every number in the brochure comes from sea trials. And here's the question almost nobody asks. What state was the yacht in during those trials, and under what conditions? Here's the irony. The industry knows the real figures, down to the decimal. Every yacht is effectively a floating sensor array, and builders model fuel consumption from millions of voyage reports, accurate to a fraction of a percent. The yards know that data perfectly. The problem is that only one scenario makes it into the brochure, the most polished one, the ideal state you'll never meet at sea. Take the location of the trials first. They usually run in a sheltered bay or behind a breakwater. Flat water, no waves, no wind. In other words, conditions you'll never see again out in the open sea. The second factor is the state of the yacht itself. On trials, she's empty, a condition the industry calls lightship. Just 10 to 15% of fuel in the tank, no fresh water, no stores, and no guests aboard. Let's see what that means in practice. A Nordhavn 72 holds 15,500 liters of fuel, and simply filling the tanks adds 13 tons to the boat. Add water, provisions, crew, and a tender, and she sits deeper. The deeper she sits, the more of the hull drags through the water, and that directly increases drag. And here's the best part. A propeller matched perfectly to the empty boat becomes simply too heavy for the engine once she's fully loaded. The engine can't reach its rated RPM. Mechanics call this lagging. Fuel consumption climbs, exhaust temperature rises, and engine life drops. In numbers, at full load, you lose 5 to 10% of the brochure speed. And that's before you've even hit any waves. That was trick 1, but the yard has something better up its sleeve than an empty hull. It has the human factor. And on your bridge sits an instrument that lies to you on every trip. I'll tell you which one in a few minutes. During the official trials, it isn't the client at the helm, but a professional test captain who knows that hull like the back of his hand. Trim alone can shave off 2 to 7% of fuel consumption. The captain does it with tiny adjustments of the trim tabs that you'll never replicate out in a seaway. Then there's the route. Speed trials are planned around the tide tables, so the boat runs with the current and the wind behind her. The GPS then shows a lovely speed over ground. In reality, the hull moves through the water more slowly than the GPS shows, and it's speed through the water that tells the truth about fuel. But the flattering figure from the GPS goes into the catalog, while the real one is tucked away in a drawer. On your own sea trial, do the opposite. Make 2 runs, there and back, at the same throttle, then average them. The current and wind cancel out. The current carries the brochure's numbers, but it won't carry you when you're heading home into the Mistral. Trick 3 is my favorite, because it's hidden neither in the hull nor the engine. It's hidden in your air conditioning. A modern yacht is a floating power station. Air conditioning, stabilizers, water maker, fridges, servers, lighting. The industry calls it the hotel load. On a yacht of 25 to 28 meters, the standard is 2 45 kilowatt generators, and each burns around 11.5 liters an hour. Together that's 23 liters an hour, hour after hour, through the night and at anchor too. On top of that come the devices that draw power in surges. A gyro stabilizer sips very little once it's spinning, but on spin-up it pulls many times more from the grid. And the water maker and induction hobs add their share. And now the key sum. At economical cruising speed, the main engines burn 103 liters an hour. Add the generators and you get another 22% of consumption that appears in no range table. On a 3-week ocean crossing, that seemingly trivial detail is the difference between making port and drifting 100 miles offshore. There's also drag that wasn't there on the tests: satellite domes, an open-array radar, and a 3-ton tender on the foredeck or towed astern. The factory fuel curves were calculated for a sleek, clean profile, while your yacht runs with all that kit. So the engines have to work at a higher load just to hold the same speed. Alright, I promised you an instrument that lies, so it's time for trick 4. On the bridge, you look at the consumption: 100 liters an hour. How does the system know? It measures the fuel flowing to the engine and subtracts what comes back. Because the engine doesn't burn it all, the surplus returns to the tank, but it returns hot. And diesel expands by 0.7% for every 10 degrees of temperature. A cheap flow meter measures volume, not mass, so it sees more returning fuel than actually came back. And as a result, it underreads on your display. Then there's calibration. Factory gauges are set with clean laboratory fuel of known density, while the diesel from the pump in the marina has a different temperature and different additives, so the calibration drifts. The captain sees 100 on the display, even though the engine has actually burned dozens of liters more. Coriolis mass flow meters solve the problem, but they cost so much that yards almost never fit them. There are also two things the brochure passes over in silence. The first is the bottom. Even fresh anti-fouling costs you 2 to 4% in fuel, compared with a perfectly smooth hull straight out of the shed. And after a few weeks in a warm marina, the hull grows first slime, then barnacles, and the fuel penalty runs into double digits in a fraction of a season. The second is propeller slip. On flat water, it's 5 to 10%, but in a seaway, the water aerates, the slip grows, and the computer injects more fuel at the same RPM. The ref counter doesn't move, but fuel consumption goes through the roof. That's 4 tricks behind us, and the fifth is the most dangerous. It's about the fuel you have in the tank but can't use, and the moment when a hill of less than a fifth of a G shuts your engine down in the middle of the sea. The yard works out range very simply: tank capacity times consumption, to the last drop, to a dry tank. But a tank isn't a bottle. Inside it has baffles, required by regulation, so that tons of fuel don't surge around the tank in a seaway. The ISO standard requires tanks to survive 25,000 pressure cycles in testing. Those baffles hold the structure together, but they also create dead pockets from which fuel can't be drawn. And the pickup pipe deliberately doesn't reach the very bottom, to avoid drawing in water, rust, and sludge. As a result, part of the fuel is physically unreachable. Commercial codes like the British MGN 280 explicitly cap usable capacity below the nominal figure. Professionals know this well, brochures don't. Surveyors report cases where as much as 20% of capacity is dead. You carry that fuel as ballast, you pay for it at the pump, and you never actually use it. And now the promised finale of this trick. You're running on your last fuel, and suddenly a wave comes. A heel of just 0.18 G is enough. Half the swing of the ball in the inclinometer, and the fuel surges away into a side compartment, and the pickup gulps air. An air bubble enters the high-pressure system, the engine chokes and dies, and the engine room goes into blackout. And there you are, beam on to the sea, with hundreds of liters of fuel on the bottom of the tank that you can't reach. That's why good seamanship demands a reserve of at least 10 to 15%, always, no exceptions. The brochure builds in none at all. The most important part is still to come. Because this whole system of deception rests on a single unit, liters per hour. Let's run a simple test. Yacht A burns 42 liters an hour. Yacht B burns 83. Which is more economical? Most people say A, and that's wrong. Because Yacht A runs at 10 knots and B at 22. Work it out per distance and it turns out B carries you from point to point more cheaply. Liters per hour is a trap. What counts is distance per unit of fuel, nautical miles per gallon. And now watch how that measure exposes the extremes of the market. Start with displacement hulls, like a Nordhavn. They're governed by a hard limit called hull speed, roughly 1.34 times the square root of the waterline length. Above that, the hull starts fighting the wave it makes itself. The boat then tries to climb its own wave. Fuel consumption rises steeply. The speed barely moves, and every knot above that limit costs a fortune. To break past that limit, you have to get up on the plane, and you pay for it in fuel. Look at the other extreme, the Pershing 8X. A wonderful machine, I say that as a fan. But at 43 knots, it burns 840 liters an hour. That's 20 liters for every nautical mile, which gives a range of 300 miles. A Nordhavn, in the same comparison and with the generators honestly counted in, does up to 3.4 miles per gallon. 1,000 miles costs her 1,500 liters. The Pershing, 20,000. This isn't a knock on Pershing, they're simply two different tools for two different jobs. My problem is with the brochures that hide this table. That's why you'll almost never find a miles per gallon table in a fast boat brochure. Liters per hour look better, because distance would give everything away. And now the promised formula. Take the range from the brochure and start subtracting. First, 5 to 10% for weight and 15 to 20% for the hotel load. Then take off another 10 to 15% for weather and hull fouling, and 15 to 20% for reserve and dead fuel. From 1,000 miles, you left with 480 to 600. And that's the number you actually plan your cruise on. And when you're buying, put 4 demands to the yard. Write them down. First, a sea trial on full tanks with water and full load, not on an empty hull. Second, fuel consumption measured with the air conditioning on, both generators running, and the stabilizers active, because that's exactly how you'll be running her. Third, runs in both directions, into the sea and against the current, not just with the wind behind you. Fourth, written confirmation from the yard of how much fuel in the tank is genuinely unusable. Do this and you'll know your true range. Skip it and you'll be running on the brochure's number. And the sea doesn't read brochures. And remember one thing, this isn't the only area where the industry bends the truth to sell better. See my playlist Before You Buy. Now is on the screen.